So after we get this actual Constitution taken care of, and people sign off, and it goes to the ratification battle. So at this point, it's not completely official, right? At this point, it has been approved by the Constitutional Convention. It has been sent for the state ratification conventions, and this is where we begin to see this idea about the Federalists, this debate over the role of the Constitution. Federalism is the division of power between the national government and the state, right? And so if you're federal, if you're a federalist, you believe in this strong central authority. So part of what's interesting here is that the Federalists co-opt this word, and they basically kind of come up with the term. They had the control of the labeling first, and the Anti-Federalists get stuck with the anti-label, right? And this concern about the division of power between the national government and the states is that the Anti-Federalists are concerned that Republican values, the little r Republican values, are going to get trampled on, that a strong central government is going to be answerable to money interests, not to, your more independent yeoman farmers, frontiersmen, those kinds of things. Some of your revolutionary idealists that are going to be thinking in terms of, not trusting a strong central government, they're going to be kind of doubtful that this would work. And they also feel that this large national government's not going to understand the concerns. Remember their experience with Great Britain, that Parliament didn't understand what they were dealing with. And so there's also a real concern that rights are going to be ignored, that people's freedoms are going to be limited, that the strong national government's going to come in. And, that really, if we're wanting to preserve freedom, we don't want to have a strong central authority. People should be able to just live their lives, right? This is very much kind of that libertarian idea. They're also concerned that controlling currency, having a national currency, is going to limit land speculation and land ownership and make it harder for people to access what they haven't, and they don't understand yet that it's the American dream, but that's essentially what it is, right? This idea that American citizens are landowners, they're property owners, and that the act of owning property somehow makes you invested in the success of this country, and that by creating this national currency, we're going to close down the money supply. And, and especially because the national currency is going to be based on the gold standard. In other words, they will have actual gold to back their money. That's how national governments kind of create their credit rating, if you will. And so there's going to be a debate over whether or not we want that flexible money supply where states can print, certificates or, basically create their own money, or whether we want to have this very solid national currency. And like I noted here, we'll be talking about this argument off and on for some time. And they're just very concerned that, they think about Shays' Rebellion, and they're concerned that a standing army is going to create problems. But unfortunately, they are not nearly as convincing. That's not to say they don't have some pretty strong supporters, because they absolutely do. George Mason, who's the father of the Bill of Rights. You've got Patrick Henry, for instance. So you have people that really don't like this national government, but the Federalists will convincingly make the case. Now, part of how the Federalists will argue for a constitution and a strong central government is they'll essentially promise that they will create a Bill of Rights. And so these guys, these are more propertied, more educated. These are men that have much more kind of stable economic circumstances. And their argument is that, well, it's not that we want to take away rights, but people's passions can get ahead of them. And then you can get factions and you can get special interests, and those can sometimes not work to the best interest of the group. And then we have to worry about our boundaries and Native Americans, and that the government is not going to get too strong because the government pulls its power from the states. The states are responsible for creating this kind of power that the central government has. And they will use their pamphlets and newsletters and that sort of thing to convince people to buy into this Constitution, to explain the separation of powers, explain how this is actually going to help them. And then, like I said, they will ultimately promise a Bill of Rights in order for that to get passed. So the Bill of Rights, they'll promise the Bill of Rights. It'll get ratified by 9 of the 13 states, and then they will basically add the Bill of Rights shortly after that. So the first 10 amendments, and we'll mention those in class, so don't let me forget to run through those. Those first 10 amendments are passed in order to protect the rights of people. Make sure that they're, that they feel safe as far as the concerns that the Anti-Federalists had. The Federalist Papers are a series of essays written by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and James Madison. They write those in 87 and 88, pointing to some of the issues that are causing the need for a Constitution and why the Constitution should be supported. And they kind of argue that the federal government will balance out the political factions. And so you have this example of this national republic being created by James Madison that is really a unique concept here. So the conclusion to the constitutional crisis is that the Constitution takes effect in 1789. And you're going to see that's when George Washington becomes the president. So he will, this is why you have an election in 1792, right? So you'll have the Bill of Rights getting passed. You'll have, basically 2 revolutions happening, one from the control of Great Britain, and then another one that happens to essentially create this Constitution, this form of government that creates the stability. And it's a form of government that is new to the United States. It's never been done before. And so this is an entirely new system. So again, understand that you essentially have 2 revolutions happening in a very short time span. And it's also telling that this second revolution, the one that led to the Constitution, is one that's peaceful. That's one of compromise and people, finding a way to work together despite their differences. The Judiciary Act of 1789, I mentioned that already. And then you're going to see that we have this new society that gets created. And part of this new society is the promise of the aristocracy of merit. That if I work hard and I make good decisions, that I will work hard and I will gain the wealth and the social recognition I deserve. That America is a place of opportunity, right? And this is where we kind of get this idea of freedom and individualism that really kind of drive the American idealism, drive the American dream. They also argue that individual gain is acceptable. Now, of course, we know that this is for individual gain for white males, right? It's not really for women. It's not for people of color. It's certainly not for Native Americans. But it does make a difference for your artisans, your prosperous farmers, people that are aspiring. It creates this idea that if I can't make it, on the East Coast, if I can pack up my stuff and move out west and get my own land, I can make something of myself. I can be successful. I can do something, right? So aristocracy of merit. It's not a true aristocracy. It's not one related to birth or anything like that, or even inheritance. It's one that's based on the efforts that you have yourself. And this is kind of one of those foundational ideas of American society. You also have this idea of a Republican mother, Republican motherhood that says that it is the women of America that create these stable family units, that train their men, their sons, and help their brothers and help their husbands understand what citizenship means, what their responsibilities are. And so they take these ideas of women who had been so important in settling the frontier, in creating these colonies and really as a part of the American Revolution, whether it's as Abigail Adams or, the Daughters of Liberty or whatever, they realize that women are very important to the success of the colonies. And so what they'll do is they'll rely on this concept of Republican motherhood to essentially justify a woman's role, right? To say, well, you don't need the vote because, well, as a Republican mother, you'll shape the will of your husband and your brother and your son. And so that's how you'll let your vote be heard. And so you definitely see that women like Abigail Adams do not get listened to. You have places like New Jersey where women had temporarily had the right to vote because of property requirements. Those will get taken away. And the idea is that women should be educated. Remember, the United States has always been based on this idea of education, going back to the Puritans. And that idea is going to take hold, especially for women in an upper social class or a middle social class. The expectation is women should have functional education because they have to train their children. They'll be the ones to be kind of homeschooling, especially at a young age. So you're going to see that women become literate. Education is a part of American women's lives, in some ways more so than what you see over in Europe. And women do believe in the democratic values, but it's all channeled through either their families and their husbands, or it's channeled through social causes. So Republican motherhood is really about taking this frustration of some women who wanted to see equality and liberty and the pursuit of happiness applied to them, and they kind of shape it into this very gendered kind of form. Very much in the same way that we see the aristocracy of merit taking the drive and the impulse and opportunity and basically promising people of all social classes, you can make something of yourself if you just work hard enough. So in some ways, it's kind of making people kind of accept limitations, as far as limitations on I have to go out and work and earn it, or I have to work through my husband. But on the other hand, it is definitely creating an outlet for people in a way that you didn't see it happening in France. Remember, the French Revolution, it has a very different outcome because they don't have these opportunities. They don't have these things. Men were individualistic. Women should help others. Some interesting kind of gender nuances there in case that happens to interest you. And expansion, you're going to see after the Constitution, as things kind of settle down, as people start moving out west and immigration continues, because the general health of the colonies, or not the colonies anymore, the United States, is much greater, you're going to see that natural increase is significant. You're going to start seeing that you have a lot of children being born, and so you're going to see the population essentially doubling every 20 years or so, and you're going to see that society was heavily rural. You do have big cities like New York and Philadelphia and Boston and Baltimore and Richmond. But those big cities, even though they're cultural and they're centers for news, it's really about the rural society. It's really about the countryside, the farmers that are moving out. And so concerns still remain very local. Even though we've created this large national government, understand that it's going to take a little bit before we understand exactly how that national government works. So a lot of concerns were immediately at home. And of course, Native Americans get ignored. African Americans, will fight to end the international slave trade. But we'll have the end of the international slave trade. But then with the development of the cotton gin and the expansion of cotton, you'll see this kind of second, middle passage that we talked about when we introduced Solomon Northup. So understand that the existence of the Three-Fifths Compromise, while it is pretty awful to label it as such, understand that the context in which it was suggested was a context in which slavery was dying out. Now, what will happen is that by the time you get to the 1790s, you get to 1800, things have changed dramatically, and so this is where that American slavery, as we know it, comes in. The American slavery of the 19th century. So important concepts you need to take with you. So the 1780s will convince Americans that private interest will outweigh the public good, and somebody needs to keep an eye on the public good. That if we just say, oh, hey, we can trust republicanism, people are going to get greedy and they're going to get selfish. And of course, we know from our understanding of colonial issues that is very much true, right? And so somebody needs to be elected to keep an eye on the big picture. What's ironic is that you definitely saw that Great Britain was attempting to do that, but unfortunately they failed to create a system that allowed people an outlet, the outlet of, individualism, the outlet of, Republican motherhood. And so people didn't have these outlets that they cared about, and so that's why it seemed so oppressive when the British government did it. But now you've got a federal government that's meant to keep an eye on things. The idea is that this will be a very dispassionate, balanced kind of government, and that good men will come in. And that the idea is that you'll have informed citizens. This is one of the other aspects that I think we see missing today many times, which is that our republic, our constitutional republic, is based on the idea that we, the people, will be informed, that we will understand, and we will care about the core values of this country. And I think that's one of the issues that we see missing quite frequently, is either people are not informed, or they don't fully understand the complexities of the issues, or they only understand the issues as it pertains to them and their particular interests. And that's exactly the thing that the federal government is meant to stand against, which is to tell people, your selfish interests don't matter more than somebody else's selfish interests. So we as the government have to balance all this together. And so you definitely see that that what's going to happen in this new country is this idea that you can earn your privileges, you can earn the opportunity to be, famous, earn the opportunity to be in politics, earn the opportunity to be wealthy. You're also going to see religious freedom be a major piece of this, and we'll talk about that with the First Amendment. So again, this is tied into individualism and this notion that that nobody can tell you how to believe, that you can have your own faith. So you're an end to state-supported churches. You can thank James Madison for that. He was an advocate. And of course, interestingly, of course, in Texas, Baptists are a dominating denomination. But when the First Amendment's passed, it's actually to protect the Baptists because they were being persecuted in places like Virginia. You also see this debate about states versus nations, right? Republicanism versus federalism. And it will take 70 years. We'll end up with a civil war before we figure this out. Figure out what exactly federalism means. How does that actually function? And we'll fight a civil war about it. We'll probably spend, another 70 years or so with a strong federal government. And now really what you see in the 21st century is kind of the converse of that, where we're back to fighting about republicanism and state governments versus a federal government, and how much power should the federal government have. And again, the French Revolution is happening. And the French Revolution is a much more radical concept where you have people losing their heads. You have, dictators, basically totalitarian regimes coming in. So the French Revolution is going to create some drama for the new nation, which we'll be talking about as we look at George Washington and his presidency and all that kind of stuff. And you'll see that the French Revolution, while it doesn't have an effect on the U.S., in the sense of a global interaction, it will have an effect on the U.S. as far as domestic policy and political parties. In fact, it is the French Revolution that will help drive the creation of political parties in the United States. So we'll be talking more about that. So I'll be sharing with you maybe a couple of other smaller videos. I think I said I was going to do one about Shays Rebellion, and I might share one about the French Revolution as well, just to give you a little bit of that global context. So we'll be doing some activities in class this next week before we move on into